So now we invite Venerable Bhante Sujato to speak about what stories will you tell? We're telling ourselves stories every day, yet when others hijacked our minds, they hijack our stories too. In this session, Bhante Sujato invites us to reflect. Will you live someone else's story or will you find your own? So, Bhante Sujato is a Buddhist monk, scholar, and translator in the Thai forest tradition. Formerly a musician, he ordained in 1994 and later founded Santee Forest Monastery in New South Wales, serving as its abbot for nearly a decade. As a leading figure in early Buddhist studies, he leads Sutta Central, through which he completed English translations of the four main Nikayas, and is known for his accessible teachings, research, and progressive engagement in modern Buddhism. Bhante Sujato, over to you.
Thanks, Rabina, for that. That was awesome. I'm going to do that. Okay, that's better. Yep, cheers, thanks. Right, thank you so much. Thanks to the Metta Centre for putting on this event and for all of you being here. Thanks so very much to Venerable Rabina Curtin for that great talk. So, you know, I was really, when I looked at the schedule and I saw that they're putting me on like at the sort of late afternoon time slot, I was thinking, oh yeah, that's great. Because like I've organized like so many conferences in my life, like a lot. Since I was 18, I started organizing conferences. And so I well know that this slot is when you just put like the most boring speaker. No, seriously. And I feel honored that they chose me for this, because it's an opportunity for everybody here to just like gently close your eyes and nod off. And, you know, you've heard so many wonderful, powerful, inspiring teachings. You know, I'm here to just gently lull you into a nice little sleepy bye-byes. And so, yeah, so I'm very honored that you gave me the opportunity to play this crucial role in the conference. So I'm here to talk about the stories that we tell ourselves. And I don't know if you noticed, but I just told a story about myself. See, I could have been like, oh, they gave me the really bad spot. Oh, no, everyone's going to be falling asleep. How are they putting me on after Rabina Curtin? It's terrible. Everyone's going to be like, how can I possibly live up to that? And so I could have told myself that story, and that would have been a whiny, victim story about how I was hard done by. But I could have told myself that story. It'd be a pretty boring one. But I decided instead to tell you a story where I could be humble and I could make everybody laugh. And I could make you think, oh, you know, Sujato, he's not such a bad guy after all. So I wanted to try to flip it around, and I wanted to make myself the good guy in my story and in yours as well. And so now you're not quite sure, are you? Because now you're wondering, how is he manipulating me? Is this real? Is this not? What is going on? So that's an excellent place to start a Dhamma talk. Okay, so so many of it, we've come here today to listen to Buddhism. Buddhism tells us a certain kind of story, and we've heard many different variations of that story. Bhante Joe told us those incredibly hardcore stories in an incredibly amenable manner. which I think was a great achievement. And I know that, like, even though we're, it's a Buddhist conference, I'm well aware of the fact that not everybody here is a Buddhist. And, some people here will think of themselves as Buddhists. Some people will think, oh, I don't know what I call myself. And some people may be Christians or Muslims or Hindus, whatever. I just want to let you all know that you're all welcome and that hopefully we can all learn something from the Dhamma. So one of the things that I spend a lot of my time doing is looking at how the Buddha lived and how he how he taught. And of course, that's another story, right? We Buddhists have the primary story that Buddhists have told themselves down through the years is the life of the Buddha. And the Buddha was constantly talking to people who were not Buddhists, like all the time. And he provides us a lot of examples of how to do that. And so one of the things that the Buddha did not do was teach Buddhism. Right? I mean, the Buddha would say, oh, there was this cow I saw on the way here, and it was separated from its calf, and it seemed like really sad, and that's how craving works. He wouldn't be like, okay, here's these 4 noble truths, and you have to memorize these, and then there's dependent origination, and there's 12 of these, and there's 5 of those, and then you have to put the 3 of these in there, and all of that kind of stuff. Like, he's not teaching Buddhism. He's responding to people's suffering. So when I'm looking at you, I'm thinking all of these people here are suffering. And you've been drawn here in some way because you don't want to suffer anymore. Somehow. And there's this very powerful story that we tell ourselves that we can move from suffering to freedom. One of my friends in Sri Lanka, Venerable Kirpa Goranyananda, told me a story once. We were in Bodh Gaya together, and some others went off to Rajagaha and climbing the Vulture's Peak mountain and so on. And there was this little beggar boy at the base of the hill. And as you know, if you're going in India around the holy sites, many of you have been there, and little beggars will come around and so on. And this little kid comes around and he's like, Baba, Baba, bakshish, bakshish. And Brahmanyananda just looked at him and put his hand on his head and said to this little boy, he said, do you not want to be free? That's all he said. Do you not want to be free? He spoke Hindi, so you understand. And this little boy burst out in tears and said, yeah, Bhante, I want to be free. Help me to be free of all of this suffering. I find that a really amazing story because I find it's incredible that desire, that longing to be free is found everywhere. It's found in the most unexpected moments and most unexpected people. Somewhere in Good. Okay, let's try again. How are we going? Is this working? Can you hear? Is this working? Is there any sound? Anything coming out? I think oh no, hang on, we're back. Are we back? Okay, we have sound. Crazy. Technology, right? Like, think about technology. I used to be a musician, okay? Back in those days, which was a long time ago, microphones were still just as bad in those days. Here we are like 40 years later or something, and we still have bloody microphones don't work properly. What the hell have we been doing all this time? So the Buddha's life story is a story of renunciation. The Buddha living at home. I'm sure we've all heard the story of the 4 sites and so on. If you haven't heard that story, You'll find it in any beginning Buddhism book. I'm not going to repeat it here. But there's another story which the Buddha had told when he spoke of his own going forth. He said, Attadanda bhaya jatam. Fear arises from taking up arms. And by looking at people in conflict, in war around him, he was filled with terror. He wanted to find a place that he could settle down, but all the directions were tossed about. He couldn't see a single place that was not settled. He said people were like fish flopping around in a stream that was dried up. And he said even when they found their settlement, they'd still continue to fight. And he wanted to know why. Why is it that we are like this? And he found the answer was stuck deep in his own heart, his craving. And so that is when he went forth and sought an end to all of this suffering. Now, this is the story that Buddhists have told themselves in one version or another for thousands of years. One of the previous speakers referred to the Jataka stories, and the in the Pali tradition they have more than 500 Jatakas, and other traditions have many more still. And all of those Jataka stories, in one way or another, keep coming back to that idea of renunciation. The stories that we tell ourselves, the stories about letting go. Now, we live in a world that tells itself a rather different story. So my kind of time, the time when I was a young adult, was the 80s. And in those days, the story was greed is good. It's like literally the opposite of Buddhism. Greed is good. And we lived in a world that was dominated by this ideology that somehow greed is going to create goodness and prosperity for all. That's the story that they want us to believe. And it's kind of interesting. It's kind of weird. I don't know, like as well as being a musician and a Buddhist monk, I'm also, especially when I was a kid, I was a science fiction geek. And in those days, I was a science fiction fan kind of on the cusp. Like I would read the old school golden age science fiction, like Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and Ray Bradbury and so on. And very often they would paint pictures of a future that was beautiful and hopeful. You think of something like Star Trek. Yeah, no money. And we just travel around the universe finding stuff out and learning things and having adventures. It sounds great. And so there's this kind of ability to imagine a beautiful future, that the path that we're on now leads to somewhere beautiful. Around late 70s, 80s, and you had the influence of people like Philip K. Dick and others, and the emergence of cyberpunk. And we started telling ourselves stories of dystopias and apocalypses. And we can only tell ourselves stories of a few years in the future. I wrote a science fiction novel a few years ago. And I tell you, it's genuinely frustrating because you can't finish the chapter before it's real. I wrote a whole chapter on AI and all the things that's going to happen. And they're tick, tick, I've got to finish this chapter quickly because they're all coming true while I'm writing it. And somehow our ability to tell ourselves stories of the future has been taken from us. We can't imagine a flourishing future anymore. How many stories are like that these days? Seriously, how are we able to imagine a world in 10 years' time or 50 years' time or 100 years' time or 1,000 years' time or 10,000 years' time? Can we even imagine what that might be like? Do we think that we can be consuming the world's resources at the rate we are now in 10,000 years? We use the word sustainable, but what does sustainable mean? Does it mean that we can genuinely keep doing it indefinitely? And so we live in a world where, since the story that we've told ourselves is greed is good, and the value that we've told ourselves is more is better, then the only future we can imagine is a future where evil tycoons are dominating the world with their evil corporations, and they're going to be doing lots of evil things. And it seems kind of uncannily prescient. You think, oh, wow, you know, look at Blade Runner and these things, and they were telling these stories and they're all coming true. Until you realize that like all the evil people who are doing these things actually were fans of Blade Runner as well. And they watched all of these movies and read all of these books, and they were like, yeah, I want to be that evil guy. And they're literally doing those things. So we live in a world today where we have an oligarch who's from a third generation Nazi family who's just been promised $1 trillion paycheck, who's responsible for 600,000 deaths this year alone, and who happily prophesies that the technology that he is building will end humanity itself. And somehow we imagine that this is normal, that there's something that this is sustainable, or in any vague way, like survivable. And so what these people have done is that they've taken the future away from us, and they will tell us things like AI is inevitable. You know, AI, artificial intelligence, of course, LLMs, they also call it, large language models. Technical term, of course, the ENMDD, right? The ENMDDs, evil Nazi machines of death and delusion. That's like the scientific term. And these are the future, we're told. These are inevitable. We can't do anything about it. Some years ago, I was part of a group on Australian religious response to climate change. We went to Canberra to try to tell our politicians, please don't burn the world to death. And I remember we spoke with one of the then politicians, Greg Hunt, who was the Environment Minister for the Liberal Party at the time. And I really remember one thing that he said: what can I do? What can I do? He's Greg Hunt. He's the Environment Minister for one of the largest fossil fuel producing nations in the world. And yet he says, I'm powerless. There's nothing that I can do that's going to make a difference. And this is the narrative that they want to tell us. They want us to think that we can't, that they want to take our story away from us. They want us to think that their future is inevitable. So what I would like to ask you to imagine right now is, well, what if, and look, I'm just making a suggestion, what if these guys are just lying to you all the time? I know it seems crazy, right? But what if they were just lying to you all the time? And what if this future is not inevitable at all? What if it's only created because they want it and they're building it and they're pouring every single resource that they can into creating it? And we are somehow asked to accept that this is natural, that this is normal. Oh, human beings, like we always have greed, we always want things, you know, wanting more and more is natural. That's part of how humanity is. If that's the case, why does advertising exist? I mean, if it's natural for people to want things, you wouldn't have to advertise stuff. People just go and buy it anyway. This isn't normal. And the plain fact is that for thousands, tens of thousands of years, people all around the world lived lives of contentment where they did not have to be fascinated by all of these things. And they lived simply. And we know from the example of the Indigenous peoples of Australia that we can learn various things about how they did that. Just to give you one simple example, I'll tell you the story which I told at the Psychedita conference a couple of years ago, but just very briefly to repeat it. I can't remember all the details now, but one of the creation myths of this part of the world, especially the Blue Mountains, was the serpent, I think it's the serpent Gurungutch and Murrugan the hunter. I may have got them mixed up, but anyway. So Gurungutch was the rainbow serpent, Murrugan was the hunter, and he hunted the rainbow serpent across the landscape. And the serpent dove into the land and created caves and then piled up the mountains. And so all the features we see today in the Blue Mountains were created by the mad hunt of Murrugan chasing the rainbow serpent. And the only person who tried to speak a voice of reason to him was his wife, who said, "Come on, darling, come home, enough." But he ignored her and continued with the hunt. Eventually, long story short, the serpent hid deep beneath the earth, and the hunter was able to not kill the serpent, but able to cut off a little bit of his flesh, and had to make do with that. Yeah? And this is the lesson which the indigenous people learned so long ago. Yes, we don't have to go mad and take everything. We don't have to kill the rainbow serpent, the power of creation, the power of life. We can take a little bit and then be content. And so this is not a kind of a marginal belief. This is a normal belief for most people in most of human history. My grandparents grew up like most people in Australia. These days, Australia is a very prosperous country, but in those days it was quite poor, and my grandparents grew up in poverty, and then during World War II and so on. When I first started shaving, and I was staying at my grandparents' place, and I had a disposable razor. I was a teenager and just started shaving. And I still remember to this day, my grandmother looked at it and said, "Oh, I don't like those things. They're so wasteful." A disposable razor. Yeah. We think nothing of it. In the scale of the waste that we make, it's nothing. And yet, my grandmother was not a greenie. She was not an activist. She would have been a lifelong Liberal voter, I'm sure. And yet to her, that was wasteful. A disposable razor. So what kind of story do we want to tell ourselves? What kind of future do we want to live in? Who are we that whenever we imagine the future, all we can imagine is more destruction? What if we could tell ourselves another story where our wisdom, our capacity, our science, our technology actually made the world a better place? What if instead of our technology being dependent on the destruction of the earth and its creatures, what if our technology depended on the abundance of the earth? What would that even look like? Imagine what that would be like. Imagine if we could only see our own future of abundance, not as like a compromise. See, these days, the way even like environmentalists talk about it, so we have like carbon budgets and all of these kind of things. And I remember the environmental writer, George Monbiot, talking about this. And he said it was like, this is like all the nations are going there negotiating their carbon budgets, which means they're fighting amongst each other to see how much of the environment that they get to destroy. That's what a carbon budget is. So we can't see our prosperity apart from destruction. What if it were different? What if we could see our own prosperity? What if we didn't? What if AI wasn't going to write our story? What if humanity reclaimed our own story? What if you, humans sitting in this room, reclaimed your own stories? What would that be like? What if you were to say, what is the future that I want to be in? What is the person that I want to be? Not what is the person that they wanted me to be, or what is going to be inevitable, or what I've been conditioned for, but what do I think would be a life of freedom, of joy, of abundance? What is it that matters to me? And if we start asking ourselves those questions, very quickly we start to say things like, well, clear air matters to me, sparkling water matters to me, life matters, And maybe machines don't matter so much. And we are increasingly ruled by a class of people who are quite happy to turn the earth into one big machine. At a scale that is simply incomprehensible. Just this morning reading they want to do it on Christmas Island now. Incomprehensible the scale of what they're doing, building this so-called artificial intelligence. And so little care and respect and honor is for human intelligence, for human lives, human consciousness, human stories. And somehow, I don't know, somehow when I look at history and I look at all of the great things that have been done, it seems to me that most of them have been done by people. Rather than like the great paintings and books and those things. And the Buddha taught Vedimanasa, for one who feels. And that means every single person in this room, even the men. I know, right? But men have feelings too. I know. Sorry, guys. Sorry to let the secret out, you know. But for one who feels. And we have value. Our thoughts have value. Our feelings, our values have value. What we want to do. And most of all, there is that within us which has that longing to be free. How are we to manifest that longing to be free? What does that mean? How can we live our life through creating abundance for those around us, abundance through nature and through growth, rather than through destruction and fire and death? So we live at a crucial moment, I believe, in history. And how we live now will define the story that we will tell ourselves when it comes time for us to die. So I hope that we can find our way to be able to tell ourselves a story that we would be proud of. Thanks, everybody.